Good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of Nightmare Theater, an open book club for nightmares. It's going to be a good one today. Worked really hard on the presentation. It'll be about nightmare complications, and what I mean by that is some of the more common things that are associated with nightmares that we like to talk about, and some of them are, I think, disorders at times, but we'll get into that in the presentation. After that, I'm going to be reading some sleep paralysis accounts, some accounts of night terrors, not too many of those, and then I'll get into some nightmares, and then at the very end of the stream, we will have a single nightmare, our very first user or viewer submitted nightmare, so pretty excited for that. Anything else? Yeah, if you have nightmares that you want me to read on the stream, please send them in to theforgottengrove at gmail.com, and I'd be happy to keep those anonymous or read them aloud next week. But for now, let's get into this presentation. Let me just make sure you can see. Looks good. Okay, so as I mentioned before, we're going to be talking about nightmare complications this week. And there were 3 in mind. I was thinking more of these common nightmare complications, including false awakening, night terrors, and sleep paralysis and hypnagogia. So I think that everything but night terrors is something that I've mentioned in previous streams, but I've never really got into any of the 3. There are other nightmare complications such as nightmare disorder, but I thought that they're a bit less entertaining because they sort of involve, in the case of nightmare disorder, someone who just has many nightmares to the point where it interferes with their day-to-day life. So I decided to omit that from this presentation. I just wanted to stick to the juiciest nightmare complications. Starting with false awakening. It's a vivid and convincing dream wherein you awake from sleep while still being in the dream. It can also be referred to as a double dream or a dream within a dream, which of course became a meme after that was popularized by the movie Inception. False awakenings are often the jump-off point for a lucid dream, or what they call a pre-lucid dream. And the way that this happens is that the dreamer may start to wonder whether or not they are still in a dream, because something might be slightly off with their false awakening. And they may correctly figure out that they are indeed in a dream, and from there, they gain control over their dream. Another phenomenon that can occur in lucid dreaming is called looping, which can occur when the person who's dreaming, they wake up over and over again. And this is depicted in Nightmare on Elm Street. The philosopher Bertrand Russell has also claimed to have experienced about 100 false awakenings in succession after coming out of general anesthetic on one occasion. There are certain elements of life that may be dramatized or out of place during a false awakening. Like there could be a new painting on the wall, or you might not be able to talk, or in your awakening you think this is real life, but all of a sudden you find yourself unable to read. These are signs that you might actually still be within your dream or nightmare. There are 2 types of false awakening. The first one is more common. This is when a person wakes up in realistic or unrealistic surroundings, doesn't matter. But the main takeaway is that they believe that they are starting their day as normal and nothing seems off. This usually results in waking up in the real world shortly after, or a pre-lucid dream, or falling back to sleep in the dream, so dreaming that you're falling back to sleep. And then common examples of this are the late for work dream. I described my own sort of account of a late for work dream previously in episode 1, where I talked about how always following an exam period at the end of a university semester or a high school semester, I would have this recurring dream for about 2 weeks after every exam period where I woke up and I was late for an exam. This would be a classic example of a late for work false awakening. Another common type is the dream that results in bedwetting, where you might believe that you're getting up to go to the washroom, yet you're still asleep, and you believe that you're on the toilet, and then you do your business, and all of a sudden you've wet the bed. I was also wondering if anyone's ever pooped the bed. Feel free to answer that in the chat. But a type 2 false awakening is when the subject appears to wake up in a realistic manner, but the atmosphere is suspenseful. And so this is a more nightmarish version of the false awakening, of course, less common. But in this version, the person's surroundings may at first appear to be normal, and then they can gradually introduce something uncanny or unwanted that presents itself. Alternatively, you can falsely awaken into an immediate sense of suspense or apprehension. Charles McCreary suggests that type 2 false awakenings are related to the primary delusionary experience seen in psychosis, which is described as a general delusional feeling that then proceeds to a specific delusional belief. And he's also suggested that the reason for type 2 false awakenings in a psychotic subject is that they are in a state of hyper-arousal, which is a state that can also lead to micro-sleeps in the waking world. And then this is a bit of an aside, but a micro-sleep is 0.5 seconds to 30 seconds, and they're temporarily drowsiness or intermittent sleep, I guess, when an individual fails to respond to a sensory input and becomes unconscious. I do think I've seen someone do this before. Individuals who experience a type 2 false awakening are also more likely to experience sleep paralysis, which we'll be discussing in a moment. Night terrors, the next thing I wanted to talk about. So this is a sleep disorder that causes feelings of panic or dread, and interestingly, it occurs during the first few hours usually, or on stage 3 or 4 of non-rapid eye movement sleep. So I have the different phases labeled here, phase 3 and phase 4. So these are, obviously, as we know, dreaming generally tends to occur in the rapid eye movement phase of sleep. However, night terrors actually occur in deep sleep. So there'll be more on that in a minute, but they tend to last for 1 to 10 minutes. And they usually begin in childhood. I don't know if you can tell, by the way, but I made this figure all by myself. Please give me gold stars in the chat. Right, so it usually begins in childhood and decrease in frequency with age. In childhood, they tend to last longer than in adulthood as well. And there are factors which may lead to sleep terrors at a young age, such as sleep deprivation. Certain medications can cause it, stress can cause it, fever, and then other intrinsic sleep disorders. These episodes can occur in intervals of days or weeks, but they can also occur over consecutive nights and multiple times in one night. So night terrors happen, as I mentioned earlier, during the arousal from deep sleep or delta sleep, which is when brain activity is the lowest. Again, you can see on the right of this figure I created, this is what your brain waves might look like when you're awake. This is what they look like during REM sleep, as your heart rate is increased, and you tend to obviously have physiological changes that more closer to mimic being awake. And then in deep sleep, this is basically like the lowest, state of thought or of brain activity that you can be in before being dead or something like that. So they're different to nightmares, of course, which occur during REM sleep, as do false awakenings, because those are nightmares. And sleep paralysis also occurs during REM sleep. And in my opinion, this makes the night terrors somewhat spookier, because you shouldn't actually have all that much brain activity. And yet you have these like horrifying things, and you actually act them out, because you'll see in a minute. So people who have a lot of deep sleep, therefore, are at a greater risk for night terrors as well, even though they can technically occur during daytime naps. But yeah, I didn't know prior to doing this research that a nightmare and a night terror were like physiologically different things, and they actually are, which is pretty interesting. So, the universal feature of night terrors is inconsolability, and it's very similar to what you see in someone who's going through a panic attack. People will often be described as bolting upright in a panic. In many cases, individuals will also have extreme motor activity, such as thrashing their limbs around, punching the air, or acting as though they're trying to flee from something. People can even seem to be awake during a night terror, but they will appear confused, inconsolable, as mentioned previously, or unresponsive in attempts to communicate with them. And they're unable to recognize those who are familiar to them. Occasionally, when someone going through a night terror is awakened, they will lash out at the person who awakened them, and they'll become violent. So it can actually be dangerous to attempt to wake someone up from a night terror, although in cases they're a danger to themselves and you kind of need to take that risk. The lashing out is usually not remembered by the night terror sufferer the next day. And this reminded me a little bit of sundowning, except of course in sundowning it isn't considered a state of sleep. But sleepwalking is also a common to see during a night terror, and this is because sleepwalking and night terrors are different manifestations of the same parasomnia. So it means that there's the same underlying abnormal behavior of the nervous system that results in both of these things. And I do think that at some point in the future I'm going to do... Technically these three things I'm presenting on today are parasomnias, but there are a lot of rarer or less talked about parasomnias, and I would really enjoy getting into those in a future presentation. Adults who still experience night terrors after childhood are more likely to suffer from mental illness, particularly PTSD and general anxiety disorder. But as well, there are certain personality disorders, such as dependent schizoid and borderline, which tend to be more likely to suffer from night terrors as well. There's some evidence that night terrors are inherited. A relative who experiences night terrors makes you 10 times more likely to experience them also. But the exact source of the heritability isn't known, so it's not really known how, like, genetically that all is configured. Now, getting into sleep paralysis. So this is something I think I've touched on in every single episode so far. And it's important for folklore reasons, as you'll see. So sleep paralysis, as have been mentioned before, is a state during waking up or falling asleep, generally waking up, in which a person is aware but unable to move or speak. And this is likely to be the condition out of which the legend of the mare arose, as I discussed in previous episodes. So there's between 8% to 50% of people, quite a guesstimate there, but that range of people is said to experience sleep paralysis at some point in their life, while 5% of the population have regular episodes. So it's actually quite a common occurrence. which may be surprising to those of you who have never had it. I can't remember if I've had it, or if I did, it was in childhood. The condition can also be triggered by sleep deprivation, psychological stress, or abnormal sleep cycles. The underlying mechanism is believed to involve a dysfunction in the REM sleep, which I'm going to get into in a minute. There are no treatments, but it's not considered a serious condition. There are other symptoms of sleep paralysis, which include imagined sounds during the paralysis, such as humming, hissing, static, zapping, buzzing. On the other hand, you can also have voices, whispers, and roars. So these are like auditory hallucinations, essentially. It's also widely known that you can experience pressure on the chest during sleep paralysis, which is another way in which you can see that the lore of the tale of the mare might have come to be. Because the mare, right, if you remember from the last episodes, is a being that sits on your chest and gives you nightmares. Must come from sleep paralysis. I was speaking to someone yesterday who has frequent sleep paralysis, and she also described this pressure on the chest. Even more symptoms include intense emotions such as fear or panic, sensations of being dragged out of bed, which would be terrifying, or flying, numbness, feelings of electric tingles or vibrations running down the body. And the same person I talked to recently also described those tingles that got worse as she tried to move. And those tingles might be an actual physiological coming online of the nervous system, but we'll get into that in a second. So there's kind of a second half to night terrors here, which is hypnagogia. So this is, the icing on the cake, if you will, if it wasn't bad enough already. So a hypnagogic hallucination is another term for hypnagogia. So this is in which the person can be paralyzed and see a supernatural creature suffocating and terrifying them, accompanied by the feeling of pressure on the chest, as I mentioned before, and difficulty breathing. Other common examples of these hallucinations seen during hypnagogia are a shadowy figure entering one's room or lurking outside their window during paralysis. In memes and popular culture, you'll of course seen this referred to as the sleep paralysis demon. And another common hallucination of hypnagogia is an out-of-body experience. Not everyone who has recurrent sleep paralysis has hypnagogic hallucinations, however. But sleep paralysis will also cause a hypervigilant state where you're very aware of threats, which makes sense because you're literally paralyzed. And this is like true physiological paralysis. It's not in your head. Well, it starts in your head, but your head obviously controls everything else, which I'm going to get into on the next slide. And so this state of being hypervigilant, of course, is thought to contribute to hallucinations because you're already anxious, and then your anxiety builds onto the monster that you see, something of that nature. I don't remember if I personally have ever had sleep paralysis, but I know for sure that I can recall several brief episodes of hypnagogia just as I'm falling asleep. Some of you maybe have had some of these as well. The most common one that you've probably had is where just as you're on the precipice of falling asleep, you'll feel this sensation that you're falling, and then you wake up because you feel like your gut drops. That's technically a hypnagogic hallucination. The other one that I've seen just as I'm on the cusp of falling asleep is this terrifying deformed face that comes down on top of mine from the ceiling, and I wake up instantly, of course, in both cases. But yeah, I wanted to get a little bit into the neuroscience of sleep paralysis. So during REM sleep, when sleep paralysis occurs, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex turns off. So this is the part of the brain that allows you to plan and think logically. And This absence of logic is why your dreams feel so real, obviously, because most dreams other than night terrors occur during the REM cycle of sleep. And the brain also shuts off the body during REM sleep because that rapid heart rate and the chaotic nature of dreams might cause us to act out and hurt ourselves. So this is sort of, the evolutionary biological explanation of why your brain would shut your body down during REM sleep. So this shutting down of the body is called atonia, and it's technically a type of parasomnia in and of itself. Oh, sorry. Atonia isn't a type of parasomnia. Sleep paralysis is, because it's a change to movement that shouldn't be happening. The mechanism by which the brain achieves motor atonia is through hyperpolarization of motor neurons, meaning that their negative membrane potential decreases even further, so they lose their excitability and they cannot fire. And of course, this is throughout your entire body during the REM cycle of sleep. On a higher order of control, the hyperpolarization is mediated by GABA, which you've probably heard of. It's a neurotransmitter, as well as glycine, which is an amino acid. And these things need to be cut off from their respective receptors on these motor neurons for hyperpolarization of the motor neurons to be reversed. So normally, atonia stops upon waking, but in those who have sleep paralysis, for whatever reason, your GABA keeps binding to its receptors, and so it actually takes a few minutes to clear after you wake up. So you are literally like physiologically paralyzed. It's not a nightmare that you're paralyzed, which is kind of like even more scary. And you might also be wondering, well, can the opposite thing happen? Right? Like, what if not enough GABA binds to its motor neuron receptors during REM sleep? And yes, this is a thing that can happen. So it's a different parasomnia called REM sleep disorder, and it causes you to act out your dreams and, of course, your nightmares, which can cause injury to yourself. And it's interesting to then compare that to the deep sleep. So in deep sleep, obviously, your motor neurons aren't impaired, which is why most like sleepwalking and other crazy movement during sleep is, when you're having a night terror or something. If you're moving in your sleep, basically you either have a problem with your GABA receptors or you're in deep sleep. You can't be in REM sleep and moving around if you're healthy physiologically. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I'm definitely going to do a presentation in the future, as I mentioned earlier, on rare parasomnias. But these are sort of the three ones I feel like you hear the most about in popular culture. I hope you enjoyed that. Let me get back to is Liam playing in the background? Yeah. Thank you. I have not done so. I assume that is a response to the pooping remark. That's good. That's excellent news. All right, so now let's get into some case studies, if you will. So I wanted to start with some sleep paralysis stories. So I went to the sleep paralysis subreddit, and I found this post here by BBLGMPink. That's the username. And the title of the post is "A Demon Pinched My Toe." Hang on a second. There we go. I've been super stressed lately and having terrible neck pain, causing me to sleep on my back. Because of this, my sleep paralysis has really ramped up. Last night, I saw a demon come into my room and walk to the foot of my bed. Usually, it's a man breaking into my house and standing in the doorway, or a man climbing into my house through a window and crawling across the floor to me. It's never been a demon-looking being. I was terrified, of course, and before I knew it, the demon pinched my big toe. This is the second time I've felt something. The first time I felt the full weight on top of me, which is obviously a common thing in sleep paralysis. Normally, if I'm terrified, I struggle to scream and eventually wiggle my toes to wake myself up. This time, I screamed, like a full scream, until my boyfriend woke me up. My heart was racing like I'd never felt in my entire life, and I just had to lie there and calm down a while. It was so horrible. I had to share it because I've been thinking about it all day long. Phew. It's quite something. Sandor Sundays, let's go. Yeah, so that one I feel like illustrates a lot of the themes that we've been talking about in today's presentation. So, the demon, but they actually feel like real pain and real sensations as well. People in the comments of this post are also saying that the big toe is associated with death, like a warning pinch, which is a scary thought there. Here's another post by someone called Dan Sinner Voice. And the post reads, the title is Horrible Sleep Paralysis Last Night. I've been suffering with sleep paralysis for years, and I have narrowed down my triggers to stress and also eating a heavy meal too close to sleep. We are having a little staycation this weekend, and since it's a long day, we decided to get pizza. It was quite late, and about an hour before we decided to go to bed. I roll on 3 a.m. I wake up with stomach cramps, which have been keeping me awake for an hour. I went back to sleep, and sometime later, the paralysis occurred. I was aware I was awake. Aware I was aware. I felt like I was suffocating, trying to scream for help, but only able to let out a mild moan. It felt like it went on for a few minutes, and it was horrible. Usually it's only a few seconds, but that experience last night really scared me, as I thought I might be permanent for a moment. I was able to wiggle my toes, and then a moment later, my body returned back to me. I hate this phenomenon. It's pure evil and scary as hell, and I've been feeling off since. How does anyone else cope with this? Yeah. Never had a dream about your big toe, but you broke it a few times. I'm sorry to hear that. Horrible sleep paralysis. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I don't have a whole lot of analysis to even do on these because I kind of explained it in the presentation, but I want to keep moving. And then I'll get into some night terror ones. Okay, sorry. This is by a user named randomperson1727. Is what I experienced sleep paralysis, or is this house just haunted? The post reads, sometimes I'll have these weird dreams. In the process of falling asleep, my fingers, then my arms, then my legs will get tingly. Then I won't be able to move them. Sometimes I'm able to yank myself out, but it's really hard. And other times, I just don't care, so I fall into the dream anyway. In the dreams, I'm normally either really disoriented, and the dream is weird and trippy, or in the dream, I can't open my eyes all the way. Ooh. And I'll normally be half conscious, and in the dream, I sort of know that it's a dream, but at the same time I don't. ? Anyway, I had all of those happen today. One of those happened today, sorry. I started to go tingly and stuff. But then it was like I got really warm and all of a sudden, especially below my knee. And then I was slowly starting to be dragged towards the foot of my bed by my ankle. It felt insanely real. I could feel the hair of my head move up against my pillow. I could feel how my sheets were moving. There was a slight pressure everywhere, but a bit more on my hand, and when I woke up, I didn't have to open my eyes because they were already open. It was like I could feel someone there, like a presence or something. I was thinking, holy shit, this is the end. I'm going to be abducted by a spirit or an alien or something. And I had this feeling of sheer terror, not just being afraid or shocked about something, but this feeling in your gut, and it's utterly agonizing. I was really freaking close to screaming, but then I was able to yank myself out of the dream or whatever. I'm still slightly on edge because it felt so real. Is this sleep paralysis? Or is the house I just moved into haunted? I haven't had much sleep in the past month. Don't know if that would have contributed to anything, though. I mean, it definitely could contribute to it, because I believe one of the, symptoms, or what was it? The pre-selectors for if you get sleep paralysis is lack of sleep, right? And there was something else from at the beginning that I wanted to touch on. Oh yeah, it was interesting to me that he felt the tingly feeling begin before he fell asleep. So, but that shouldn't be possible. I don't know. It doesn't, because that implies, right, that he is losing the motor neuron even while he's still conscious, and so his brain's actually like not shutting down fast enough. Something's misaligned for sure. It's really interesting. Doing me a fright. Yep. That'll do it. All right. First time. So this is a post by a user called PKMN Battle Girl. Pokemon Battle Girl. And again, the post is called First Time, so I assume this is about her first time having sleep paralysis. Last night, I had my first sleep paralysis experience. Pretty sure we have a ghost due to some consistent experiences. As cliche as it sounds, it's always around 3 a.m. I know this because my husband lost a watch in our room a year ago, and it always chimes at 3:30 a.m. We have no idea why, but it's done it for years. Anyways, last night, I chimed and immediately became aware of what was going on around me, and a tall black figure appeared from the bathroom, where all the activity happens. He was holding an umbrella, I think. Anyways, I tried screaming, moving, closing my eyes, but nothing worked. I finally looked at my husband, and then looked back at the black figure standing over me with the umbrella to my head. I was still screaming, but nothing was happening. My head was getting warmer, and my ears started to ring. Then it was over. My dog came running in, and my husband woke up to comfort me. Needless to say, I couldn't go back to sleep, because it was one of the scariest experiences I ever had. Side note, a few years ago our neighbor told us the previous guy shot and killed himself here in the house. Explains all the renovation, but we've never been able to find the location. We think it's the bathroom, because for a while our new puppy would wake up at 3 a.m. and just bark at the bathroom door. I would open it, but she would refuse to go in. She would just stare. Anyways, I needed to tell someone. That was good. Yeah, I mean, that honestly is something that really terrifies me, is the thought of getting it for the first time like that. I feel like there was a time in childhood, like if I really rack my brain, I feel like I did experience something in childhood where I was in the paralysis, but I didn't actually have any hypnagogic hallucinations. Yeah, in this case though, that's like the thought of having that full experience of seeing the creature emerge and begin to torment you at the foot of your bed, like for the first time, that must be unreal terrifying. Have you ever heard about sleep-induced self-induced sleep paralysis. I remember reading about it when I experienced it a long time ago, like 10 plus years. I don't know if you talked about it earlier or not, just tuned in. No, I actually have not heard of self-induced sleep paralysis. Doesn't sound like something I'd want to do. Do you know how that happens? You know what? I think that like I actually maybe have heard of it, but I was like afraid to look it up. Because I don't want to know how you do that to yourself in case I accidentally do it to myself. You know what I mean? But I mean, feel free to post in the chat how you do. Like, wait, did you say you tried it? You experienced it a long time ago. It's on the path to lucid dreaming. I'm definitely going to be reading more about lucid dreaming later, and I'll probably do like videos about it. Maybe I'll even do a stream about it. I heard you have to sleep on your back. Other than that, I don't remember much. You don't move for as long as you can. So you sleep paralysis and you can lucid dream. Weird. But you're still conscious though, right? Like you're not actually dreaming. Like aren't you just using your imagination while paralyzed? I don't know. You experienced normal sleep paralysis that wasn't self-induced. It was terrifying. Yeah, I bet. I don't know. I've never had anything like what these people have had. Or like, did you have a hallucination? Trick your body into thinking it's asleep while being conscious. Interesting. Can't imagine how that works. So now getting into a couple night terrors. So this is a post by a user called Mercumore, and the post is called Boyfriend with Sudden Night Terror. Last night, I was woken up by my boyfriend, 25 years old, moving around like he was having a nightmare. So I tapped him to try walking him, and he started screaming. I don't know what he was doing or going on, so I started shaking him. I don't think English is this person's first language. He then sat up screaming in my face, so I went into defense mode, hitting him, screaming at him to stop, while he grabbed at my hands. Suddenly, his yelling stopped, and he wasn't aware of anything that had just happened. He thought I was the one having the problem, and I had to explain to him that what he just did, and why I was shaking and terrified. We looked up what it could be as soon as we could, and I calmed down. So I know if it happens again, I shouldn't touch him, and just move away. I'm really shaken up, and I just wanted some advice or something. He said that's never happened to him before. Is this weird to suddenly start in adulthood with no history? The only change in routine is that he has a perforated eardrum and is on 2 antibiotics for an infection right now. I want him to talk to a doctor at his follow-up. It goes on like that. Again, with these night terror ones specifically, it almost feels like you're reading someone's like medical history. So, you know, I don't want to get... It feels almost like wrong once it, you know, gets into that whole like second half, but it is a very like freaky phenomenon, and I definitely wanted to like go into some like real world examples of it. So there was another thought I had reading this first paragraph. Oh yeah, it kind of reminds me of a movie called Dark Skies. I don't know if any of you have seen that, but there's this scene where the husband it's like a family they've been like marked by these aliens, and the husband walks down let me back up. The wife wakes up in the middle of the night, and she realizes the husband isn't there, and she like goes out and she sees on the main floor that the front door is wide open, and she walks down and she looks at the front door, and her husband is just standing like by the front sidewalk, and he's just staring like away into the distance. And she can't see his face, obviously, because his back is turned to her, and she slowly walks around him, and she looks at his face, and he's just clearly being like possessed by an alien at that point or something, because his facial expression is like he just looks at her, and it's like the freakiest thing. But that this story actually reminded me of that, where it says he sat up screaming in my face. Suddenly his yelling stopped and he wasn't aware of anything that just happened. Like that reminded me of Dark Skies like crazy. Let me just catch up with the chat here. Once your body starts twitching to test if it's asleep, you have to keep trying to stay still. Interesting. And then another comment here. When I eventually broke out of the sleep paralysis, I was sweaty and my legs were killing me from being so strained. I wasn't trying to throw myself on the bed, but I couldn't. Only hallucination I had was that I was falling endlessly. Wow. Yeah, I haven't had an endless fall. It's only been like temporary. Sounds like you were baked. For sure you were baked. Well, I'm glad the chat's reached a consensus with that. Let me get into another night terror story here. So, this is a post by Gladiolus1239. And the post is called Boyfriend Has His First Night Terror at 22. Why? The post reads, my boyfriend had a night terror for the first time in his life last night, around 3:30 a.m., about an hour after he fell asleep. I heard a thud and woke up to see him on the floor, a few feet away from the bed, looking like he fell. I said his name and asked if he was okay, and he started screaming like bloody murder. My first thought was that someone had broken into the apartment, so I screamed and started looking around. Then he stood up and started screaming while looking directly at me, and that made me scream even more. Then I thought, oh no, maybe he forgot I was staying at his place and he thought I was the intruder in his bed. I shouted his name a few more times. He burst into tears and dove into bed right next to me. I just tried to comfort him as best I could. About a minute later, he said, I don't know what happened. I think I had a nightmare. He couldn't remember much of it, except that he knew he had screamed. It has been a few hours and I'm terrified to go back to bed. After researching night terrors, I now know how to respond a bit better than I did. I'm terrified it will happen again. I was wondering if this just starts happening to people randomly. Some factors we were thinking about were that this is his first time I'm spending the night with him in his new apartment, though I stayed with him many, many times at his last place. We've been dating for 3 years. He also has been dehydrated for the last few days. Didn't get a lot of sleep the past 2 nights, and we were using a new fan that made low noise at a frequency that bothered him. I've been trying to think of everything that might have caused this out of the blue, and so I was just looking for some words of wisdom from people with experience about this. One of the comments does say that theirs started in their early 20s, but I don't know, it sounds odd to me that he's just allowed himself to be dehydrated for a few days. I don't know if I would have let that happen. Yeah, but again, that's so freaky. He stares at her, he stares directly at her, mouth open, screaming bloody murder, staring right in her face. That reminds me of Dark Skies. These night terror ones are really freaky. But again, I think I'm going to stop with the night terror ones there, because again, it feels like I'm reading someone's like personal medical history, and I almost feel like bad. There were some that I was going to read that I cut out where it was like causing some real like relationship problems, and the guy was like, I'm done with this, and it's like, oh wow, like I feel kind of guilty reading that kind of thing. So yeah, let me just check the chat here. So I was into lucid dreaming quite a while ago, like in the middle of high school. I had a dream journal and everything. Some of my favorite experiences were being able to fly. Yeah, that would be awesome. I think my first ever dream, not a nightmare, but a dream that I can remember having was running down this apple orchard on a hill, and then I just like took off and started to fly. But I can't make myself do it. Oh, I'm going to tell you that in a second. Let me just finish the chat. Okay, only had a few handful of those experiences. Yeah, he should drink water. I agree. Yeah, but I've had actually a number of dreams. Some of them have been nightmares. Some of them have been regular dreams where I actually am able to fly by flapping my arms, which is not usually how people, think of flying in dreams. And some of them are scary dreams. And I flap my arms, and it's very slow. Like, it actually goes like how you'd expect, but it's just like a little bit. It's like as though gravity just stopped, but there was still air, and I was still pushing myself. It almost felt like swimming. That's what it felt like, but I was just doing it in the air. And I can actually, there was like a scary situation on the ground, and I would just like slowly like get over it. And that was actually like kind of funny, but it always felt like it made total sense. Like I've had this, like, I don't even know, maybe 25 times. Like, it just seems to make total sense that I should be able to flap my arms and just slowly levitate. Yeah, not the most glamorous flying, but it's pretty neat when I like think about it. All right, now I just want to get into some good old-fashioned proper nightmares, as this is Nightmare Theater. And then probably like in about 10 minutes or so, I'm going to hit up that viewer submitted nightmare. But this is a post on nightmares by a user named Zibonira. And the post is called, "I had a nightmare about an imaginary neighbor." The post reads, "Okay, so let me start off by saying that this dream seemed very normal-ish at the start. It started with an episode of South Park. I don't watch South Park. In the middle of Iowa. All was fine until I transported into the episode. I would never wish that on anyone. Once there, we were introduced to this woman who lived next door. She was very clingy. She would send us notes, tell us to call her, and even invite herself over. Well, in the dream, I lived with imaginary parents because I was a kid on South Park. They weren't home this week, and the neighbor woman would come over to check on me. I got chills from this every time. When inside, she would just start breaking down and crying. She would scream the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. 'Let me out, let me out,' as I hear her pounding the wall. Now this shook me, because I really don't like when people scream or make loud noises such as banging. So I locked myself in my room, because I didn't want to see her episode. Oh, episode, right. I was thinking South Park episode, but he means screaming episode. I contemplated calling the cops on her, but then I realized this woman is probably being abused by her husband, and that's why she's doing all this. The clinging, the screaming, the banging. It was all so real. The warning signs were there. I actually started to fear for my life because my parents wouldn't be home for a week. So I reached for my phone to call the police, but once I did so, the dream was over. I woke up sweating, and I was too afraid to even look around my room. I thought those screams were real. I actually started to think I heard them in real life. I don't know anything that could make me come up with such a disturbing thing. I'm not in any situation in life that could be described as remotely similar to this. I just think my mind was conjuring up disturbing thoughts. Anyway, thanks for hearing this out. I'm hoping maybe someone can explain this odd phenomenon." The woman in the dream actually reminds me of a babysitter that I had, that we had in childhood. We had this woman called Mary, and she was like a conspiracy theorist or something, but she would just randomly scream. We would also like hit her for some reason. That was kind of odd, childhood stuff, just hitting the babysitter. Yeah, but no, she also like, whenever there was like a knock on the door, it was like Jehovah's Witnesses or some random person at the door, and she was like, no, don't open the door. And we were like, why? She would literally like run like around the outside of like a wall and like hide, and she'd be like, if you open the door, they'll come in and the house will become hers. And I was like, okay. I was like, all right, Mary, thanks. That just, I don't know, this story, this nightmare reminded me, this imaginary neighbor in the story reminded me of that babysitter. Okay. All right. So this is a post by Ben Axel, and it's titled, Ashes Exploded at My Face and I Couldn't Breathe. The post reads, something was burning in my bin. I was trying to put out the fire, running around the house to find wet stuff to put it in. Then it exploded in my face, throwing a lot of ashes at me and directly in my mouth. Then I was in shock, like in very bad highs from drugs. And my brain was hurting, and I began fearing for my life. I slowly couldn't breathe anymore because it was stuck there and he was inhaling too much toxic ashes. When I went to the bathroom to try to get water in there, I saw my face in the mirror and woke up because of that. I can't even describe, but my cheeks were way too low and it was really scary. It was terrible. When I woke up, I took a few minutes just to be sure I was actually breathing. I couldn't feel the air going in anymore, just like in the dream. Then they went back to normal. I probably wasn't completely woken up. So a false awakening. Fire dream is a feeling of no control. Not sure what low cheeks means. Yeah, I don't know. Sounds like a medical condition. Yeah, I wonder though, honestly, like anytime I hear about a dream where you can't breathe, if maybe you actually can't breathe. I heard of a story, I think I saw a news article about it, where there was a guy who kept having like hypoxia in his sleep, and he kept kind of like waking up gasping. And it turned out that he put this like night vision camera on himself while he slept, and his cat was coming up trying to be affectionate, and it was like lying on his face, so he was just getting like a mouthful of fur, and that was causing the hypoxia when he was asleep. So I mean, maybe like I can imagine having a dream about, and I've had also dreams that are kind of similar to this where you can't breathe and it feels like your mouth is like full of something, and it's because I've been sleeping with my mouth open and everything's just all dry. So I think I've had that. Is actually when you're not breathing. Yeah. I had a bit of a funny one. Okay. Let me just do another quick scary one. So this is a post by a user called Miss Lucy, and the post is titled, My Most Uncomfortable Nightmare I Had. The post reads, I was pulling the garage door down and then opened it back up a bit. I did it again, but it opened up once again. And suddenly, a black figure burst through the door. I couldn't see it, but I woke up at the dentist, and a doctor had a mouth with no nose or eyes. And then I got up, but my head was just pulling itself back into the pillow, and I was able to wake up, but my shoulders hurt a lot. Thoughts? Oh, wow. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to know with that. It just sounds like there's some scary stuff going on. Black figure burst in, woke up at the dentist. It honestly just sounds like an amalgamation of fears. Doctor with a mangled up face. Head pulling itself around in weird ways. Anyway, let me just do this funny one, and then we're going to do the viewer submitted one. Okay, this is a post by Lesbo Lord, and the post is called I Can't Stop Dreaming About Dinosaurs. The post reads, As silly as it sounds, I'm dead serious. I remember my first dinosaur dream. It was awful, and I was very, very small. As a little girl, I remember having a dream about finding nests of puppies, kittens, and everything cute. I even found a crib of a little baby, and I was in a weird jungle thing. Then I remember finding all these things again, but instead there were just blood in their places. Oh, okay. And then a giant-ass dinosaur showed up and started chasing me. That was the scariest dream I had. That was the scariest dream for me at the time. And since then, dinosaurs have been frequent in them. Like I regularly dream about a dinosaur apocalypse or a whole new planet where they're everywhere. I dream about them just showing up. In the middle of school, I opened a locker and out jumped these 3 raptors. I had a dream where every cat in the world transformed into dinosaurs. I'm unsure. It's strange and I hate it. LOL. Anyways, whack. Anyone have something similar? No, that's fantastic. Hi. If only there could be more dreams about dinosaurs out there. The world would be a better place. "2021 Return of the Dinosaurs." I support it. Right, so now we're very lucky to have our very first viewer submitted nightmare this week, and the submitter has asked to be left anonymous, but the nightmare is titled "Nightmare from the 1980s. I am a student studying in the basement library at a university. The walls are thick stone, painted white. While absorbed in my work, I hear a commotion outside the building. I pack up and leave through a ground-level door that opens on a sunlit green lawn, lined with deciduous trees. I have a vague impression of people running beyond the trees. Buses are arriving. People are piling into them. I go towards them, and I am confronted with a man pointing a gun at me. I stop and stare, and he pulls the trigger. The bullet enters the center of my forehead. I go immediately blind. I have a sense of warm liquid moving downwards through the inside of my head. I feel myself falling in slow motion. Then I wake up. This dream stayed with me ever after, and I would not go near such a library if I ever saw one. Thank you very much for that submission. Yeah, dying in dreams is interesting. People say often that if you die in your dream, you die in real life, and that's definitely not true, because I've done that many times as well. Another common theme is dreams where you're falling. They say that you always wake up before you hit the ground, but I usually just hit the ground. Sorry, headphone users. But yeah, I don't know. I even had one where I was falling. This was when I was a kid, and I hit the ground and I woke up, and I was on the floor, beside my bed. You always wake up just before you're about to die. Well, aren't you lucky? Apparently not all of us do. Yeah, but I mean, another element of this viewer submitted dream is the whole it almost seems like a school shooting aspect to it. That could be where the fear is coming from, because it's taking place in a university library, and it's someone just opening fire with not much warning. So yeah, I can definitely see that being alarming. I didn't know people actually experience death. Yeah, they do. Sometimes I'm already dead when the dream starts. Wow. That's a vibe right there. Anyway, I think that's going to do it for this week. Thanks so much for tuning in. And again, next week at 9 till 10, I'll be streaming. There'll be another brand new episode of Nightmare Theater, Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. And send your nightmares, please, to theforgottengrove@gmail.com. Get that party going in my email. It can be anonymous. We can credit you however you want to do it. Yeah, I think there was something else I wanted to say. Oh yeah, just subscribe and hit the bell so you get notified next time I start streaming. And as always, embrace the beautiful dark.